Hey, I'm Francesca, and this is the Love with Francesca podcast. Today, I want to chat with you about the power of loving yourself. Now, you might hear that, and that might sound super cliche, and honestly, it did to me as well a few years ago. But now that I'm on this side of my personal growth, mental health recovery, call it whatever you want, journey, I now understand the power of loving yourself. So, before we get into it, let me just introduce myself briefly. Like I said, I'm Francesca. I'm a relationship coach and a mental health counselor. And I created this podcast mostly because I have a lot to say. That's just the honest truth. I have a lot to say. I have a lot of opinions, and I think that my opinions could help someone else feel less lonely in their life and not feel like they're the only one struggling with insecurities or self-doubt or in their relationships. So that's kind of why I wanted to do that. Like I said, I studied to be, well, I am a counselor. I'm a mental health counselor. I studied to become a mental health counselor. And I was on track to become, your typical therapist working in an agency job, 9 to 5 sort of profession. And then life kind of took a turn, and I ended up working with my dad, who runs a career coaching business, which is very much based on him and his life and everything that he's learned and experienced. So, pretty much what he teaches is kind of helping you become the kind of person that is able to create the life that they want. And so what we do is we help people do that mostly in their careers, but then also in the rest of their lives. And as I learned, I don't really, you don't really listen to your parents when they're your parents, but as I worked with him, I learned the value of mindset. Now, coming from a therapist background, I had understood this, I had learned this, but it was mostly for mental health issues, right? So, like your typical mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, post traumatic stress disorder. I'd learned it for that. I never quite understood it in terms of just like regular life stuff, right? And so, when I learned it with my dad, that's when I just got super passionate about the fact that we can help regular people, right? I think I won't get into this today, another day maybe, but there's a gap between the therapy world and the coaching world. And it's challenging for people to access therapy for so many different reasons. And one of them is insurance, in the sense that you have to have some sort of like official mental illness typically in order to be diagnosed with something, in order for insurance to cover your sessions. And the thing is that not everyone fits a diagnosis. Not everyone should be diagnosed. I struggle a lot with the idea of diagnoses. I do respect them. I do think that they're very helpful in certain situations, but I struggle with the idea that everyone fits under some criteria of diagnoses. Okay, so why am I saying all this? I'm saying all this because I realize there's so many people in our society that don't necessarily fit under that category, but still need help, still struggle in their relationships, still don't quite know how to set boundaries, still aren't clear about what they want or how to get what they want. Struggle with control, struggle with mental health, but in a lighter sense, right? Not in like an I need to be hospitalized sort of sense. So, as I worked with my dad and as I learned about, the different issues that people are dealing with and how to help them with that, and he was asking our clients, like, okay, what's your mission? What is your sole purpose? What are you here to do? Like, why were you born? I started asking myself these questions, and the conclusion that I came to is that I've been blessed with being very talkative and very verbose and very opinionated. So I was like, well, why don't we just take that, everything that I've been through, and we'll get into that in so many other episodes, but I've struggled with a lot of mental health challenges, and I've been able to, how do you say, come out on the other side of them. And I just kind of want to share that. And then I kind of put all that together with the fact that I did study to be a counselor, so I do have the training and the expertise and the knowledge to be able to talk about these different subjects. But I'm also humble enough to know that there's a lot that I don't know about. So that's why we're going to have some guest experts on, and we're going to learn from them. So, with that being said, I packaged all of that together and thought and decided, well, why don't I go help people? Why don't I become an entrepreneur? And why don't I create opportunities to share what I know and make this information accessible for people all over? And why don't I contribute to, all the other incredible people that are creating content like this to help people like you feel less alone, feel understood, be able to not just feel understood, but like really truly understand and accept yourself so that you can build the life that you want and you can have the relationships that you want. So, with that being said, more specifically, what I really love to talk about and what I really love to help people with is I really love to help people speak up for themselves, get in touch with their deep truth and feel comfortable enough sharing that. So, and then using all of that to create not only positive relationships with the people around them, but also a positive relationship with themselves. That's something I have very much struggled with in my life, and I have done a lot of work to overcome. So, this is me just humbly kind of sharing that with you and hoping that it resonates. So, after a long journey of figuring out what I was going to do, whether I was going to build a group coaching program or do individual coaching, all this stuff, I realized I'm not quite sure how I'm going to build that or what I'm going to do, just being transparent with you. But I did know that I wanted to create this podcast. I did know that I wanted to share what I know and I wanted to interview people and I wanted to talk to people that are doing this sort of work. And I wanted to create this space, this container, a community where, we can get together and we can talk about the hard things, right? The things that make us feel ashamed about ourselves, the things that make us feel guilty, the things that make us feel disconnected from ourselves and from other people in our lives. So that's a very long way of saying that I'm very excited to be doing this today. And this is our first episode. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about the power of loving yourself. Um, and what I'd like to do is, I was going to start with a personal story, but I think we'll hold off on that. What I'd like to do is kind of define self-love for you. So when we talk about self-love, I think sometimes you see like very cliche, like, self-care, like take a bubble bath and all that sorts of stuff. The way I think about self-love is really just self-acceptance. So it's acceptance without judgment of ourselves and who we are. I say that because we're not always able to embrace and celebrate who we are, and that's okay. That doesn't have to happen. It's really just about kind of saying, like, it is what it is. Like, I am who I am. I look like what I look like. I have the personality that I have. Obviously, things can always get better and we can always improve, but when we start from a place of self-love, we're starting from a good place, right? I think a lot of us in our society, we talk about, work on yourself and get better. But the thing is that if you currently don't like yourself or you hate yourself in some sort of way, you're kind of just going to go in circles a little bit. Like, even if you do the steps, let's say like working out, for example, or eating healthy. If you just work out and eat healthy because you currently don't like yourself, it's even if you lose the weight or you eat healthy or you get to the point that you want to get at and you're able to do, all the cool things that you're able to do when you work out a lot, that's not actually going to get you to love yourself. The self-love is much deeper. It's about looking at what happened to you. It's about looking at how it impacted you. How are you now like perpetuating what happened to you to yourself? So what I mean by that is, for example, if you grew up with a very critical parent, and they were very critical of you, how are you now perpetuating what happened to you, right? So maybe you no longer live at home, you no longer live with that parent, you're no longer being criticized by them every day, but somehow they still live in your brain. Everything that they said to you is still affecting you. So that's the way in which we kind of perpetuate that harm to ourselves. And it's not our fault. It's not like we want to do that, but it's just the way that we're conditioned. So for me, self-love is really about how do you treat yourself? What kind of relationship do you have with yourself and with your body? So actually, why don't we get into a little bit of a personal story? And I share personal stories, Um, because I find that I've always found people's stories really inspiring. I think you can read like a concept or you can learn about something and it helps, right? Like it helps a lot. But personally in my life, the people that I've been inspired by are the people that are vulnerable enough and, brave enough to kind of talk about what they've been through. And it's through their stories that I was able to identify myself and relate to them. And, first off, be like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. But then, second of all, be like, okay, wait, they were in the same spot that I am right now. And now they're out of that. How did they get out of that? Right. And it's kind of like shining a, it sounds so cliche, but like shining like a beacon of light, of hope, of like, oh my gosh, I don't have to keep being in the place where I'm in. So that's kind of my intention with why I share personal stories, and I hope it's beneficial to you. But going off the topic of eating healthy and working out, I used to really struggle with hating myself, hating my body. I was hypercritical of myself, just always judging myself, always like nitpicking at myself, like all that sorts of stuff. And so and challenging things happened in my childhood, which were kind of like mixed with my conditioning and the way in which women are treated and the expectations that are placed on us and societal pressures, all mixed in together. All of that stuff manifested in me being quite controlling over myself and my body. So like restricting food, binge eating, nothing that was to the point of actually developing like a full-on like diagnosable eating disorder, but definitely didn't look at myself with like love and compassion when I looked in the mirror. It was definitely a lot of self-hatred. And this had a big effect on me. It had an effect on my relationships. I mean, it had an effect on me mentally in the sense that I had this like little, I used to call it like a green monster living in my brain, just like nitpicking at me all day long. But it wasn't just that. It was also when I was with friends or in my romantic relationship, it's like I had created this version of myself that I thought people would be happy with. And whatever didn't fit into this like facade that I was presenting, I would hide it. Like I would, dress a certain way or like literally like sit a certain way so that I didn't like look, not that I was ever like larger than I am right now. I've always been quite skinny my whole life, but I was so insecure about how I looked, even though I looked the same as I do right now. And so I was scared that if I like gained weight, people would love me less and my partner would love me less and I wouldn't have the friendships that I had. And so I very much felt like people were in my life because of how I looked. And I know that's like I say that now and I'm like, oh, that's kind of like a superficial thing, but that's just kind of where I was at mentally a few years ago, and that's just the honest truth. And I've also learned that a lot of people, struggle with that, right? So I thought I was kind of like the only like weirdo, like struggling with this and like hyper obsessed over like food and nutrition and working out and like obsessed with like how my body looked. And then as I started learning and realizing, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like millions of people struggling with the same thing. So the way in which I was able to work through that was really just a ton of therapy. You're going to hear me talking about therapy all the time because I'm a huge fan of it. I do believe it's beneficial. And I don't know if everyone should do it. That's up to them to decide. But I know for me, it's been really helpful. And so a lot of it really had to do with like becoming aware of the way in which I talked to myself and treated myself, and becoming aware of the limiting beliefs that I had about myself and the amount of perfectionism I had, right? So maybe you're listening and you're a young woman that grew up around the time that I grew up, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, the ideal body was like this like skinny model body, like flat stomach, skinny arms, like skinny legs, like everything was just like skinny, right? And so what I've, kind of, and then I also grew up in a family where my extended family where the fact that I was skinny was very celebrated. Like my nickname was Flaquinde, which is in Spanish, and it literally means like skinny. So the fact that I was celebrated for this, and at the same time, the messages that I was seeing in society was that when you're like this, you're good, and if you're not like this, you're bad. 2 plus 2 equals 4. So that's how I kind of ended up concluding for myself, like, oh, this is how I need to look, right? This is the model of how I need to look. And if I don't fit within this ideal, then it's bad and I need to get rid of it. Um, and the problem is that when it's a part of your body that we're talking about, like, what are you gonna do? Cut off your leg? Like, no. But we also live in a society that very much like celebrates and glamorizes weight loss and diets and bodybuilding competitions with no shame on the bodybuilding community. It's just like a lot of these things are very much based on aesthetic and appearances, and they lack that sort of like soul level of self-love, right? It's very much of like forcing yourself and pressuring yourself into looking a certain way rather than just accepting who you are and then maybe exercising out of love for yourself, out of like, wow, I really love my body and I feel better when I exercise, and so I'm going to choose to do that. So for me, a lot of it had to do with like learning intuitive eating, learning how to treat myself with more kindness and more compassion, learning how to just like accept who I am and what I look like and being okay with that. And, it's not to say that we don't all have flaws. I have a bunch that I'm working on, but it's just kind of accepting that they're there, like accepting the humanity in it, right? So, right. So like intuitive eating, learning how to introduce gentle movement into my life. So, learning how to be kind to myself, learning how to like celebrate myself and the little milestones. And then just, I know I said it already, but I think it's important to repeat it, but just literally being okay with where I'm at. Surprisingly, I mean, not yeah, kind of actually surprisingly, the more I accepted myself, it's like my body just the level of stress went down. I was, binge eating way less. I wasn't restricting as much. The way in which I exercise has changed a lot. So like rather than forcing myself to do this like super intense workout class that I can barely handle, I go for walks now and I feel wonderful and I get to stretch and move my body. And, that's been a whole journey. But it's been wonderful. So I share that in the hopes that it's supportive to whatever you're going through. And I think at the end of the day, rather than like judging ourselves for the behaviors that we have, like for example, if you are struggling with any sort of, binge eating or controlling restrictive behaviors, rather than judging and shaming yourself for that, it's really like, okay, let me understand what is it that I'm doing. And when I say why is it that I'm doing it, it's not to judge it, but it's like, every behavior satisfies a need. So what is the need that I'm satisfying? For me, I think a lot of it was like I felt a sense of emptiness, I felt a sense of loneliness, I felt a sense of like inadequacy. And so I think by doing those things, I was able to distract myself and try and like control myself in the hopes that I would get to where I wanted to get to. And so I had to understand like what is the need that I'm satisfying and how can I get that need met in a healthier way that's more supportive and kind to myself, let's say. So that's kind of what I want to encourage for you to reflect on or think about today as you're listening to this is, again, like just removing that shame for a second and just getting curious of like, is there anything in your life right now that you're doing that you know isn't good for you? I'll put that in quotes for anyone listening. You know it's not good for you in a sense, but you can't get yourself to stop doing it. So instead of just forcing yourself to stop, like how can you figure out what's the underlying need that needs to get met? And we want to validate that need. We don't want to get rid of that need. Those needs are important. We need to get them met. But maybe it's exploring like, is there another way that I can get this need met that doesn't involve hurting myself in some sort of way? And the beautiful thing too, I think, not just with our relationship with ourselves, is that our relationships with others change around us. So the more that I became compassionate with myself, the more that I treated myself with more respect, with more kindness, and literally the way in which I talk to myself changed, the relationships around me also changed. I was no longer willing to tolerate people criticizing me. I was no longer willing to tolerate people mistreating me or taking advantage of me. I had higher standards, and the people that were able to adapt to this change have stayed in my life, and I have the most beautiful relationships with them. And the people that weren't able to adapt to this change, or we just, like, didn't resonate with each other anymore, they kinda drifted away, and they're not in my life anymore. And it was very difficult at the time, there was a lot of grief involved. Um, at the same time, it also allowed for new people to come in, for new people that were able to match me at that standard, people that did respect themselves and do respect me and are kind to themselves and are kind to me. And so, actually part of like, the reason why I'm able to sit here and, record this for you right now is because I had people in my life that were celebrating me and supporting me and, recognizing my talents and pointing them out to me and celebrating them with me, and that's when once I heard it enough times, it was like, "Wait, maybe I could do this, like, maybe I can pursue something that I'm passionate about." So we might also talk a little bit about entrepreneurship just because it's such a big aspect of my life right now. But aside from entrepreneurship, it's just in general like recognizing your talents and being able to create something from them, whatever that is for you. So, before I go on any other tangents, that's kind of what I wanted to say today, and I hope it was helpful for you. Like I said, I want to encourage you to just take a few minutes to reflect and think about the ways in which you treat yourself, and maybe get curious about that. And if you need any support, feel free to find me on Instagram or you email me. That's all going to be in the show notes. So, thank you for being here and thank you for listening. I want to invite you to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're listening, whether it's on Spotify or YouTube. Share your thoughts. I also have a weekly newsletter where I share the new episodes that come out and a few thoughts about the episode. I also let you know about any promotions that I have going on in my coaching services. So if you feel inclined to sign up for that, please do. That's also going to be in the show notes. And then coming up, I'm super excited. I've recorded so many episodes already. So many women in my life have been so gracious to share their time with me. Bunch of experts in their field that, my gosh, like just such beautiful conversations, and I can't wait for you to hear them. So tune in weekly. I'll be dropping episodes every Thursday morning, Eastern Standard Time. And like I said, if you want to receive an email notification, feel free to sign up for my newsletter. So thank you for being here and thank you for listening.